Landmarks Commission meeting of February 4th. First item is public comment. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to make a public comment? Seeing none. Next item of business is the approval of the minutes of the Historic Landmarks Commission meeting of January 21st.
So moved.
Second?
Is there any discussion about the minutes, changes, revisions, comments? Yes.
Comment here on page 6, item 2,
Yes.
and on the comment number 1, it ends with porch facing Anacapa Street, which is incorrect. I should say porch visible from Anacapa Street, because the porch doesn't really face the street. And then the comment number 2, it's also a little bit off, and I suggest rewriting it as follows. Those elements should be retained or replicated in any future development, because the term incorporated is unclear as to what we need to tell the ABR. So did you get that comment? Those elements should be retained or replicated in any future development. Thank you.
Is there any discussion on those changes? Are there any other changes or comments? If not, all those in favor of accepting these minutes as amended, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstain? None. Motion carries. Next item of business is the consent calendar.
Yes, Madam Chair. Let's see. Here we go. Item A, 1114 State Street was final approval with conditions. Item B, 607 Paseo Nuevo was final approval as noted. Item C, 113 West De La Guerra Street was continued 2 weeks. And item D, 625 Chapala Street was final approval as noted. And those were reviewed by Commissioner Sharp.
And Commissioner Adams.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, Commissioner Adams, that's right, reviewed item B, 607 Paseo Nuevo.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Commissioner Murray is abstaining from item D. Consent calendar has been ratified.
Who made the motion of second?
I second.
Okay. Next item are announcements.
Yes, Madam Chair, Commissioner Adams will need to step down from item 1 at 2134 Mission Ridge Road. And the final hearing for the revised El Encanto Hotel Master Plan will be reviewed at the Planning Commission next week, 1 p.m., February 12th. And Commissioner Adams had already volunteered to represent the HLC at that hearing, and we need at least one more, hopefully 2 more people to volunteer to attend that hearing.
I'll go.
Okay, Don? Okay, so Commissioners Sharp and Murray. Great. Thank you.
What was that date again?
That is February 12th, so that's a week from tomorrow, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon in City Hall hearing room. And actually, Commissioner Sharp, I believe you are attending the joint
Correct.
City Council Planning Commission hearing to discuss and listen to Plan Santa Barbara. That is taking place that morning.
Here also.
Is it in the David Gebhard room?
Yes.
Okay, but the Planning Commission one is
Right.
over at City Hall.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
You're
And I
David
believe
Schott.
Mr. Lamone has an announcement, and also Mr. Jacobus.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, I just wanted to inform you that we have a regularly scheduled meeting of our designation subcommittee. That'll be February 18th. That's Wednesday before the meeting. It's at 10 a.m. in our usual place, this Community Development Directors Conference Room here at 630 Garden Street.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
I just have a question. Jake, that designations committee, I think the public is going to be very interested in it. Is that going to be open to the public or not?
Yeah, it's open to the public. I've got Kellum DeForest that wanted a notice of when it's going to be, so he'll get an email. And also, I had a couple other people that are on a list that are going to attend the meeting. But the meetings are always open. It's not just this is a special meeting. They're always open to the public if they wish to attend.
Thank you.
hello. I'm Ely Mons, Senior Planner. Just wanted to announce that the city has prepared a nice little book that displayed the lawn alternatives that are available, and Public Works Department, Allison Jordan, followed through on when we adopted the water conservation standards recently, and we had asked for photographic examples that we can point to. So hopefully to encourage more locations that where lawns could be substituted with this type of these plants, and it's pretty colorful. It gives you an example, and hopefully it'll be used by our boards and commissions to give more people an opportunity to pick these plants. So I encourage the landscape architects who are reviewing plans, if applicants are confused about what these lawn alternatives are, we'll have it here in our library to pull out if we need to reference these materials. No, what we are doing is placing it on our website, and we have a copy in our public meeting rooms as well as the public counter. And in addition, as some of you already know, we have a growing library of photo images that we've created on the website, and we'll be continuing to expand that, not only with landscape plantings that are approved for the El Pueblo Viejo district, but also more and more buildings and details that will be complement our El Pueblo Viejo guidelines, which are now in their final drafts being reviewed by our subcommittee. So we expect the guidelines to be printed and available for final review here sometime in the next 2 weeks, with a public hearing on March 3rd. That's the tentative schedule. So hopefully those will be received well also.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How do you access your website, and how do you identify the planting guide?
We have some handouts that we could refer you to that actually have web links and the pathways. What we're always doing is constantly finding ways to improve where we have things on our internet. I think it's a common complaint about how sometimes it's difficult to navigate, that we've created a single page sheet that we hand out that actually gives you the paths to get these areas, and I'll go ahead and make sure that path is also included in that link so folks can find that gallery. It's really, I think, an improvement where not only can you tell folks to go around town, but you can point them to our gallery on our internet site for those folks that can readily access buildings that you've all approved.
Thank you. The next item is, unless there are any other announcements by...
Madam Chair, I do have an
yes.
announcement.
Oh, good.
Last week, the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation opened an exhibit on stone architecture of Santa Barbara at the Casa, which is across from De La Guerra Plaza, and it's an amazing collection of photographs and other implementation material and so forth on stonework, and the Santa Barbara Conservancy has a book coming out in a couple months on the same subject. So it's created an awareness among all of us. We just don't go by the stone walls by the Mission or above the Mission on Mountain Drive and just take them for granted anymore. We really appreciate them a lot more because of this type of exhibit. So I encourage you all to go and see that.
And I believe there's a stone dressing demonstration first Thursday. Also, David Tate
Yes.
Masonry is going to...
Madam Chair?
Yes.
While we're on the subject of stone, I just wanted to report that the stone bridge at Mission Creek has been repaired. Hopefully we will avoid having people hit it again. It was hit twice in the last 8 months, and the repair bill was over $35,000, so it's not an inexpensive thing to take care of. So hopefully people will slow down a little bit as they're going across it and respect it a little more. But it looks like a good job. They match the texture of the concrete identically, and I believe that once the concrete ages, it will take on the same patina as the rest of the bridge. But the stonework was put back well, and they also put back. I was concerned about a little marker pin, survey marker pin that was in the railing, and they did manage to get that back, and they were going to double check and make sure it's in the right place. So I just wanted to say kudos to Public Works for getting that, and Streets for getting that fixed.
Thank you.
Excuse me, there was a question of why didn't the plans for the rehabilitation of the Michigan Bridge not come to this commission?
Repeat the question so people...
Callum is asking why the plans for the rehabilitation of the bridge didn't come to this commission. There was some mistake made that it was assumed that because they called it maintenance and repair, meaning that they were putting it back exactly like it was, that there wasn't going to be any change, that they could just do it with a regular building permit. And they're on notice now that if any other work is to be done on the bridge, that they need to talk to us first. But frequently, different departments might make that mistake, assuming that because it's just maintenance, that they're not changing the look of something, that they don't need to come forward. But I would have liked to have had a restoration plan, although I was consulted regarding the request for qualifications in the bidding process in terms of putting together a scope of work, which included such things as making sure the moisture content in the mortar is, the exact as to what's there and less strength in the stone, and the various things that we would do. So in the future, if there's any more repairs on the bridge, they should come here first.
Thank you. And just as a point of clarifications, I'll ask staff. Nowhere in this general business section do I have a public meeting procedure in which the public may comment or ask questions. So can you tell me how this should be handled when I have a member of the public asking a question in the middle of this section?
Well, Madam Chair, it should just be something that would be at the beginning of the hearing. The public comment?
Right, but the problem is if something like the bridge comes up and it's not mentioned in here, then he doesn't know to ask for ahead of time. That's what
Madam Chair, I think what you're saying is, can you open up public comment at any point during the meeting? And you may, as the chair, you can request the public to come forward and address the commission at any point on things that are being discussed. But you have to be careful that we not turn it into a discussion. As long as it's a question to the commission or staff, and limit that to answering that question, then we can comment on things not on today's agenda.
Thank you. Yes.
I'd like to announce that the pear trees are blooming the length of Garden Street and also down Bass Street, according to Commissioner Adams. And I'd recommend driving Garden Street early in the morning.
Yes.
It's absolutely spectacular.
They are very nice. Thank you.
Quickly.
I have a brief announcement. We like to think of our town as pedestrian friendly, but I would caution all pedestrians to walk safely. In my neighborhood, we had a man that was unfortunately killed by a bus. Please be careful when driving and walking the streets. Thank you.
Oh, sorry to hear that. Are there any subcommittee reports? Yes.
The West Beach Art Project is on time, and we've picked two teams, Rafael Perea de la Sabata and Richard Irvine, for three of the places, Bath, Los Baños, and Chapala. And Lorianne David will have Ambassador Park. And we're meeting again on February 10th, and I think we're going to start refining the project at that point. Materials are pretty well set, but I'll have more to tell you after the 10th of February.
Great. Thank you.
Seems to be on time. It's supposed to start construction in May, and we hope.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any other subcommittee reports? Seeing none, the last item are possible ordinance violations. Are there any to report or ask any questions about?
I do have a question.
Oh.
Okay. When they put the solar panels on the roofs in the yard on, I think, Laguna, they promised us some new plants. Have those plants been put in? Just a question.
Plants, landscaping, plants on...
Minor landscape.
On Ortega, on Haley? I mean, Ortega?
Around the periphery of that yard.
I can certainly look into it.
Just
see
inquire.
if the project
I'm not
is
sure
finished.
how
It
to
might not
follow
be.
up on that.
It might not be finished yet. No,
Yeah,
it's not
maybe it
finished.
isn't.
It's not. The project isn't done yet.
Okay.
So
Fine.
we'll keep an eye on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to the regular agenda. The first item is 2134 Mission Ridge Road. Yes, thank you.
Hi, Paul Poirier, Poirier and David Architects. This is Rose from my office.
Turn on.
Turn it on.
The middle button. That's it. Yeah.
There you go, Paul Poirier, Poirier and David Architects. Rose Navarez from my office will be presenting for Robert Adams, who has to leave. And this is Pat Aoyama, the property owner.
Thank you.
So pretty much, you've seen this recently.
Yes.
Nothing has changed other than a little more research on the roofing tile.
One down that way.
Yeah.
Move another one down that way.
And we have landscape plans here too, so we'll roll those out and we'll pass them around.
Whoa. Okay.
And get the updated one.
This is the updated one. There was some typographical errors. Yeah, this is
Unroll it. Pass them down there. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what this strange roof tile is that's on this building, and it turns out it's a terracotta clay that simulates a roof shake that was used in like the 1910s and 1930s. That's kind of a unique sort of roof tile. It's not just any old thing. And so we actually found that Ludowici has the same mold still, and they still manufacture the same tile that was used on this. So that's what we're going to propose to use on the new pool house for the flat tile is the terracotta tile with a glazed finish, and we're getting a couple samples of the different colors that they have available, whether that's aged oak or earth. We'll find out when we get the samples. Unfortunately, they didn't come at this time, but it does look like they actually manufacture one that has that same sort of texture on the tile as well. There's a couple, we've ordered a couple, but our intent is to try to match the existing roofing. So surprisingly enough, there's enough people asking for this stuff that it's actually a product that is out there for historical restorations. So we're glad to say that we're going to use the right stuff that matches what was used on the original house.
Thank you.
Other than that, the plans are what you saw last time, a 499 square foot pool house with a pool. We have the planting. Maybe Rose, you can run them through the Reader's Digest version of the planting plan.
all right. This is a pretty straightforward plan. Basically, we're landscaping only where there has been soil disturbed due to construction, and then also along the edge of the pool for a barrier for there's a drop off there. As you will note here in the plan, there that is a historical wall that is not being touched at all. We've got all of the plants are consistent with the compatible with Santa Barbara area. They're all drought tolerant plants. We'll be using drip irrigation, beautiful color palette, orangey. I've got some photographs here. Orangey yellows and blue flower. We've got some screening here. All of the existing specimen trees are being kept with provision for tree protection in the notes.
You guys are concerned with this monkey puzzle tree over here, and there's another huge one, this Norfolk Island pine right here, that you wanted to make landmarks or some sort.
Also some large oaks, also everything's being conserved. And we've got one thing I wanted to point out was that on this trellis area we have one vine to cover. They had considered putting one here, but because of the litter and such and the spa, we decided just to have the one here. So
Giant bird of paradise.
yeah, one giant bird of paradise added to mimic the others that are already existing. So bird of paradise, and this is dwarf agapanthus with some agave accents. This is an existing landscape area planting bed. We're just tying in the plantings from along the edge into there. And rosemary, the pincushion plant. This is a low wall here with these plantings above it with this senecio spilling over the edges. It'll be very nice, soften the edge. Okay. Any questions?
I'll ask that question, thank you.
Sorry.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Not a question, but I just want to add a point of clarification for the Commission. If you remember, a number of months ago, we saw a tree removal request for a large eucalyptus that was impacting the walls of the original Black Estate, which is the gate that you drive through to get to this property. The Parks and Rec Commission did give permission finally to take the tree down. One of the conditions of approval, of course, is that we follow through with the landmarking of the stone walls. So that tree is going to be removed, that stone wall is going to be rebuilt, and some of the walls that are on this property, such as this one that runs between this one and the adjacent property, will be included in that nomination. So it's important that I'm glad that they're preserving the walls and not doing anything to affect the walls. I just wanted to pass that on to you.
Thank you. Are you
Also,
done with your...
existing light fixtures will match existing that are on the house already. We'll just have Steve make some new ones that match that.
Do you want to talk about your...
Yeah, color palettes basically match the existing with real sandstone, and the plaster and door colors match the existing house, as does the wood color.
Okay. If you are done with your presentation, I will take public comment. And first, if I may say, there is an email in support of this proposed project from the adjacent property owners at 2132 Mission Ridge Road. And I believe that Mr. DeForest would like to speak.
Thank you. Kellum DeForest. I just wanted to ask the question of how does this plant palette or the plant material around the swimming pool with the birds of paradise tie into the original or the existing plant material and the rest of the property? Thank you.
Matches the existing plant material.
Thank you. I'll take questions from the board, please.
I have a question. What kind of approval is it requested now? Is it a preliminary for landscape and the structure, or where are we?
It is here for concept review continued.
We were unable to take action because we had submitted a historical structures report that you approved, and then after that we submitted a letter report regarding archaeology, and then that hadn't been processed yet by the city. And the city, I guess, has done their findings, so now you can have a comment, but I'm not sure what else we would give you other than to be continued for preliminary with the same exact package you have before you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Actually, the archaeological letter report was accepted on January 14th. And, of course, the structures report was accepted by you on November 12th.
Mm-hmm.
So you may take action,
Thank you.
depending on the level of completion of their drawings, as you see fit.
Very good. Thank you.
And not to complain too much, but we did attempt to get on a December hearing to have concept, but through a number of mishaps, here we are.
Paul, are there any other questions?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
This photo you've shown for the roof edge detail, was that just to show that it's an interlocking tile? Is that
Right.
That's the purpose of this photo?
That's actually the existing to show that it's actually terracotta on the underside.
Okay.
Like it's this sort of lichen-covered glaze on the top,
Right.
but at the edges where it's unglazed, you can actually see that in fact, not cementitious or anything like that. It's the terracotta. And then we found Ludowici has kind of the replica molds for the same exact stuff.
The only reason I ask is just maybe to give guidance for I assume we're going to vote on a voting idea, but for final details that I don't know if you want to finish the edges.
Yeah, they have the gable rake finish pieces that are on this handout that you guys can look at. So we'll be using the trim pieces on the hip and all that.
Are there any other questions? I have a question. Have you talked about this pool equipment enclosure at all? I don't remember it.
It was on the last one, and we are going to be having a wall around the equipment, and once the equipment gets sized, we'll be able to, get down to the nitty-gritty of where access needs to be, but the intent is to screen both sound and visual, although nobody can really see it back down in there.
Well, can you give us some idea of height, material, so on?
It'll be probably a 6-inch block wall with stucco, and it'll probably only need to be about 5 feet high, 5 or 6 feet, depending on the height of the equipment.
Okay.
There'll be a gate on one end.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'll take comments then. There are no comments in opposition, I'm going to guess.
Might
But
ask for public comment.
I have already asked for public comment. Just a moment, I'm sorry. I have someone from, if you would like to could you come up? And you may have to fill out one of these blue pieces of paper once you're done so that we can record
I sent in
you.
a letter quite a while ago. I don't know
Yes.
if you have it. So my name's Don Disraeli. I'm at 2140 Mission Ridge Road.
Yes.
Property adjacent right below the carriage house.
Yes.
And one question, looking at the drawings, I've been concerned about the wall because that's part of my property as well, the historic wall that you have.
Down.
And I don't see any reference to an enclosed fence for the pool on that side. The only reference is the open fence that's there, that sits on top of the historic wall. Unless something's changed since I saw the drawings. And I know a pool has to have a secure fence all the way around.
Yeah, we talked to the building department about that, and they said that since that wall down there, the retaining wall that's made out of sandstone, is tall enough on one side, it meets the requirement. We don't have to put a 6-foot fence on top of it. So we're just going to leave the historic rail and the wall as is along that edge.
Okay, because I asked the building department too, and they said they referred me to the direction and said you have to have a fence sitting there. It has to be secure, and that's not a high enough fence where that is, because people can get through that fence above the historic fence right there. I mean, it only goes about this high. That's not high enough for a pool.
Well, we'll have to look at it, but they said that we didn't need one over there based on the height of the existing retaining wall along that edge. So our intent is not to put any kind of additional wall or any kind of fence over there.
Yeah, because I was told by the planning also that you had to do it, but it would have to be put 5 foot in because you put an illegal fence on top of that originally.
Yeah, we resolved the fence issue in a previous permit to remove the fence.
I have to look at that wall.
Yes,
I wanna
of
make sure
course.
done
It's
right.
your wall, and you're going to be looking at it. It's not something that we can resolve, as it seems to be a building department question, and I assume that you two will be talking, and that I assume that any motion we make will keep that as an...
Well, doesn't it have to be resolved here in the sense that it is part of that wall? It is part of the historic thing?
Well, that's what I'm saying, that perhaps the motion could opt that part as a...
Just so the board's clear, when I talked to the building department, the requirement's for a 5-foot fence around the pool, and they said that if the retaining wall was taller than 5 or 6 feet, which it is on his side of the property, we did not have to put a 5-foot fence on our side of the property at our grade because that grade change met the requirement for the fence.
Well, if I can note, I mean, if we are going to give a preliminary approval, we'll be approving what we see. If you change the wall, obviously, there is no approval of the wall if it's changed.
Right. And then I just had a concern about the noise level of the pool equipment also, considering there was nothing in there for drawings or any indication of how much noise is becoming. No, and again, especially you're not going to be putting a higher wall up to block that sound. That's another issue for me.
Well,
Madam
I could
Chair?
show you where his house is, but it doesn't, his house is over here, and this is a 10-foot drop-off, so the equipment's actually going to be behind
Over
there.
that far, it does come down there.
Well, as I understand it, building requires a certain decibel level for pool
Sure,
equipment, so
60.
it doesn't matter in terms of this. It will be a lower decibel level, or it will not be permitted.
Okay.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, there's a 60 decibel limit at the property line, and building will check the plans, and if they require documentation of the decibel level, then they will ask the applicant for that information before they issue a building permit. The same goes for any fencing required for the pool. If building and safety requires that fence, they won't be issued their building permit until Mr. Poirier comes back with a plan.
And it has to come through here.
Oh, yes.
It would, oh, yes.
Okay, that's fine.
So is this, you live in this property up here, right? And this is your back corner of your property line, right? So your house is up that way, and the pool equipment's
way
down
you
below the
keep saying it,
wall.
No, my house is not that far.
Well, this is your corner.
It's kind of irrelevant,
Okay,
because
all
we've
right.
just resolved that whole noise issue. Oh,
Yeah.
Does that answer your
fine.
concerns?
Okay.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
If there are no comments, I will entertain a motion. I'm sorry?
Yeah, considering there are no comments, to make a motion for the preliminary approval as submitted of the landscape and the architecture.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained?
And
The
is it-
motion carries.
And in what, indefinite continuance?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Well, it will be indefinite continuance for the preparation of working drawings.
Yeah,
Yeah,
with two
two-
CDs.
Weeks, obviously.
That'll be more than
I
2
know, but
weeks.
you have to state it for the record. So, indefinite, and would you like that full board or consent?
Oh, it should be a script report.
Full board, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
This goes down. The next item will be Historic Structures Report for 2050 Garden Street. Now, you've done this before, I can see. I go up, this with that. Thank you. Will you introduce yourselves for the record?
Pamela Post, Post Hazeltine Associates.
Timothy Hazeltine, Post Hazeltine Associates.
There you go. Thank you.
Tim Hazeltine, Post Hazeltine Associates.
Do you wish to, oh, no, Mr. Jacobus, I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, thank you. Incredible report. I don't know what more I could
Ballast.
say. Put a hard cover on it. You've got a coffee table book. This is. I'm really grateful to the person that bought this house. This is the northernmost house in the Crocker Row. That's probably the most altered house in the Crocker Row, and they're actually going to the extent of even replacing the scalloped parapets and putting windows back where they belong, and removing windows from places where they're not supposed to be. And so this is as close to a true restoration as we usually get around here. So I just want to express my appreciation to the owner for going to this extent to reconstruct the original house. Staff has read the report. Like I said, very well written, well documented. I agree with the conclusions and recommendations. And with that, Madam Chair, I pass it on to you for your consideration.
Thank you.
I apologize. We did receive a letter in opposition from Paula Westbury. I'm not going to try and read this into the record. I'm having difficult reading it, but it will be in the file.
Thank you. Would you like to do a presentation at all before I go to public comment?
I can give a short one. Did you want to do it?
I mean, just a synopsis of. I can give just a basic synopsis of what this is in part of restoration and rehabilitation. And as Jake said the owner is very interested in restoring some of the original features, such as the esplandana, the projection, the scallop projection on both the front elevation as well as in the rear. We found evidence to indicate, that existed on both elevations, and we certainly find a great deal to support this project. Very worthwhile. It's nice to, as Jake said, see a client that's interested in restoration and rehabilitation.
Thank you. Is there public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll go to questions from the Commission. Are there any? Yes, Commissioner Curtis.
I think there was some proposed alteration on the facade that adjoins the next home in the Crocker Road. Would those alterations, excuse me, in your view, affect the eligibility of the property or... I need to start over. I believe that there is a proposal to change some of the windows and other surface features on the wall adjoining the next Crocker Row home. I'm not sure which direction that would be, but in the direction of Mission Street anyway.
South elevation.
And my question is, would those alterations, which were not part of the historic period of 1890s to 1906, would those alterations affect, in your view, the eligibility of the property for either California landmark status or our National Register landmark status?
Are you referencing like the change in fenestration?
I think there were some windows that were to be...
Sorry, change in fenestration, yeah.
And some windows, I think, were to be moved and relocated as well.
Yeah. Well, we feel it would not inhibit in any way its eligibility, that they're relatively minor alterations. And there's this wonderful offset of the restoration of other original features of the house. So, did you want to
just to add to that, that series of windows which open into the first floor of the service wing were altered probably in 1906 when a major remodeling was carried out in the exterior shortly after the Crocker family had sold the property, I think, to the Smith family. And at that time, the interior of the service wing, interestingly enough, had a service staircase, which is a characteristic feature of Victorian homes because they didn't want the servants mixing with the family. So there was a staircase in the rear wing and a number of very small rooms divided up like a kitchen and pantries and a butler's pantry. And that whole area was completely reconfigured, and we believe that happened in 1906 because the contractor found wadded up newspaper in the wall behind the boards that said 1906 and some 1905. And moreover, when they took out some of the original windows on the other side of the service wing, or the north side, they patched the holes in the walls where the windows and door had been with salvaged sections of the original wood molding and trim that went around the base of the wall. So when they opened up the walls for us, because in a few spaces, because we wanted to find out what was this wing, what did it originally look like? As you may note in the report, the only documentation for the rear wing is the one photograph. I can't remember which one.
Talking about the,
yeah,
are you
so
talking about the rear, Tim, or
that's
the
when
side?
we opened up the walls, we saw where windows had been taken out, removed, and then sometimes moved a little. Originally, as you can see from this photograph on right here, which is I think the same one that the chair put up, there was no door on that side, and there's a door now. And the windows one window was moved when the door was installed, which we do believe was around 1906, though possibly it could have been a little later. There were more changes took place after the earthquake when the chimneys, at least one or two of the chimneys, fell into the roof. And there's evidence up in the roof where the roof rafters and beams were cracked, damaged by the bricks falling through the roof. So that's my long-winded explanation to add to Pam's.
But the answer is no. It would not
No.
affect in your view, the eligibility for.
No.
As it states in the
Yeah.
report, we feel that because that has been altered, and what they're doing is they're moving the windows a little bit, but they'll be the same windows, that is an impact, but it's not an impact that will so change that elevation that the house would no longer be eligible for listing either individually or as one of the contributors to Crocker Row.
Thank you. I
Madam
think
Chair,
Mr. Jacobus has
sort of a generalized answer to that is if when we have a report like this that concludes that it follows the Secretary of the Interior standards, the setting would be one of the standards. And so you can feel comfortable that it was analyzed and that it would not impact the setting if it's following the standards, which it does according to this report. So that's just one way to look at that in the future.
Thank you. Any further questions, Commissioner Curtis?
No, just kudos. That's excellent.
Oh,
Thank you.
Oh,
Madam Shea.
I was just going to, Madam Chair, say that I'm going to keep this. I keep a few of these, and this is one I'm really going to keep. It's an absolutely sensational report. And if nobody has any problems accepting it, I would like to make a motion to accept the report.
And I'll second that.
Yes.
One in questions, I'm sorry. Yeah, let me backtrack. Just a couple of questions. You mentioned it has 9 areas where it qualifies as a landmark. You meant to say landmark, not structure of merit, right?
Yes,
Just wanted to
landmark.
in at least 9 different areas. Excellent. And could you tell me a little bit more about the roof, the material of the roof? It is now it's a shingle, right? It's an asphalt
that's
shingle.
correct, yeah.
What was built originally? Was it a tile, a clay tile?
It was a tile. It was a terracotta tile. But originally, and that was replaced fairly early on. We said on the roof. Pardon?
Figure 8A, if you'd like to look at it.
Yeah. And it was initially when we first started doing research on it, we assumed, as you would probably assume, that this changed because of earthquake damage, but it actually was changed very early on, approximately not a little more than 10 years after it was built, when the Espandana or the scallop roof projection was removed and the current roof configuration was changed, and that's undoubtedly when the roof tile was changed to shingle. And it may have been that perhaps the new owners wanted the house to look more like a craftsman, and so they reconfigured the roof. But originally it did have terracotta, and of course, unfortunately, it's been determined that the support for terracotta, would not hold that, even though at the time it had tile. But just like in the case of Falling Water, when Frank Lloyd Wright designed, his extended cantilevered porches, they didn't have enough support either, and that had to be restabilized. So they evidently just understructured, the support for terracotta. But,
so you're proposing a metal. They propose a metal tile like
which
the
is lighter,
Arenia Adobe, I would imagine, right? The other one, the one on De La Guerra Street. Is that it?
That's the proposal.
Yes.
We're looking for material that would closely approximate the appearance from a distance, in the sense that it's a 2-story volume. The roof is fairly shallow. In the sense of the public view sheds, you do see it most prominently, of course, if the house's facade is restored, will be from the side street. Because along Garden, you'll see the Espandana, which will basically cover the entire width of the street facade. But we were looking for material that would emulate the appearance, but wouldn't require the removal of most or substantial alterations to the roof. What's interesting about this house, as you may have read in the report, is that it is true balloon framing. Mm-hmm. So the vertical elements go from the bottom plate all the way up through the second floor, and that's of course, a building technique that's not as common nowadays. And it's nice that and the roofing, the roof framing is preserved for the future, and rather than having to substantially alter the roof in order to support the weight of a tile roof and to meet code.
Thank you. Commissioner Peugeot, any more questions? Or?
Well, I was interested in that. I mean, it was to me I think you're moving too fast, frankly. I mean, I think the issue of the tile is an issue. I mean, it's a compromise. I mean, will it still be eligible as a landmark with a metal tile?
I believe so, because it presently, the roof presently is composition shingle, which has no relationship or exactly.
Right, but it also it never had a metal roof. Or how,
well, we do realize that. We're trying to find, as in the Secretary of the Interior Standards, a material that is similar in appearance, not necessarily in material. The standards do recognize that occasionally you can have situations where, sometimes you can't find materials that are no longer manufactured, and the other is, in this case, we have an issue with with code allowing them to put a very heavy tile roof on a roof that's not really framed, was not designed to meet the current code. And so it does recognize that if you can find a material that's similar and that emulates appearance but not material, it can be acceptable.
Any further comments? No. Commissioner Murray.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I just really want to commend the historians and the applicant for this project and this great report. I was wondering if you have checked the other houses in the Crocker Road and whether they still, at least one of them has some of the original roof, that you could take a look and see. I mean, just one way to check.
From the street where we would have visible access, I could not see any roofing on the houses that was original. And one reason we believe that is when we looked at it, and if you see in this, here's a photo of the house actually, this is the one abutting the project house at 2050. And you may not recognize as much because that one actually has been substantially altered in some areas. Mm-hmm. But if you look at that really closely, it's more of a Roman-style roof where you have flat tiles and then the circular elements, more of a pan tile and a circular element. Some call it Roman tile roof or flat pan tile roof with Roman, tiles. And we couldn't find any of that. I walked up and down the street and looked for, is there any house where we can see that some of that roofing has remained? And I believe the house at the far end of Crocker Row on Mission Street, on East Mission, that roof was replaced. That was put on. That's not the original roofing for that house. It was put on, and I believe it was not back too far in the past. I mean, within the last 30 or 40 years. That at one time, most of the tile roof. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's more this, what we consider the sort of traditional Santa Barbara style Mission roof. But originally, these had this particular style you see here. And that could be, at least Pam and I talked about it, and we thought that's probably a little bit of the influence of this office out of San Francisco, where they were emulating and being inspired by Mission period architecture to an extent, but they were not slavishly imitative. So they weren't trying to replicate a Mission building. They were inspired by its overall character in the design of these houses.
Any more questions?
I guess the only other concern I think you covered in the report is the stucco. I think that to me that is the most sacred thing. If that doesn't get on right, I think we really will change that. But I was glad to see the treatment plan and that there's going to be somebody on board to see all of that and make sure there's a sample of it to be tested out.
Yeah, as Commissioner Murray just mentioned, there's an appendix in the report. I think it's Appendix D, and it's a treatment plan. And what that really is going to entail is Pam and I going out at specific points during the project and approving either the replacement stucco, the restoration of the windows, and some other features of the house. And the purpose of that is to ensure that as the project goes through construction, that the end product is the one that's approved by the Commission and the one that we felt met the standards.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just a food for thought item to throw out. If you remember, about a year ago, we had that RF transparent material that they put on the Granada Theater Tower. I don't know if anybody knows what the weight per square foot of that is, whether it's lighter than tile, but it was awful realistic looking when they had the samples down that we could actually walk up to and touch. I mean, you couldn't tell it wasn't real tile.
Vinyl. It's not vinyl. Fiberglass. Fiberglass.
So it's probably relatively light compared to the tile.
Oh,
I think.
totally.
So it might be something to look into. I don't know what the expense on something like that would be, but it's very realistic looking when you walk up and actually touch it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But that is obviously that is what is it, 100 feet up in the air. This is a lot closer. Yeah.
No, but actually, when they had the sample, yeah, I walked up and touched it. And they even put imperfections and chips in the tiles. I mean, it looked so real. It was pretty amazing.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, I will entertain a motion.
Oh, the motion was on the table.
And seconded.
I keep missing that. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? That motion carries to accept the report.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is 2050 Garden Street Concept Review. Oops. Oh, no. Oh, my God. Do me here. Mr. Span. Proof of concept? If you will introduce yourselves for the record.
You want to have a seat of this, I guess that'd be great. Good afternoon, welcome. I'm going to start with some introductions. We have a full team here. From Harrison Design Associates, I'm Tony Span. Also with me from Harrison Design is Barbara Lowenthal and Bernard Austin. Our client is here, Melanie Allison. Our general contractors from Giffen and Crane, Jeff Crane, Kenneth Fermonic. And you met Tim and Pam, our historians, and our landscape architect is Chris Kimple. Barbara, Chris, and Bernard will be doing a detailed presentation. I just wanted to say thank you very much for your anticipated cooperation and your kind words that you've all said about this project. It's a fantastic project. Many of us have been here long enough to know that a project like this doesn't take place without a true patron. And with that, I'd like to introduce our client to you, Melanie Allison.
Oh.
Dear, I get scared when I see microphones, like karaoke phobia. I won't talk too long because I know that we have an agenda, but I wanted to say that on my way to this meeting, I walked down Garden Street about a mile from the project house, and walking is my main mode of transport to get around Santa Barbara for the obvious reasons, because it's so lovely, but it's not the most efficient way for me to go because I'm always stopping and looking at houses and gardens and parks and talking to all of the people who are also looking at houses and gardens and parks and everything that there is to see on the streets in Santa Barbara. And I haven't been able to do that since I was a kid growing up in the Midwest. I've never lived anywhere else where that's a possibility even. And when I was a kid, I took that for granted. But now as an adult, I understand that a community doesn't just happen to be like that. It takes work, and it takes commitment, and it takes vision. And I wanted to thank all of you for spending your time and energy to build this community that I am so happy to be joining and so very happy to be experiencing the excitement of this project in. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your work. And I'm very excited to be here.
Great. Thank you.
And part of what is making this such an enjoyable experience is my terrific team who you are meeting today, led by Barbara Lowenthal, who I will now bring up to take my seat. Excuse me.
She's okay.
Good day, everyone. Nice to see you all. Thank you, Melanie. We do have quite a team. You can imagine the thrill that Tony and I had when Melanie came to our office and said, I own this home and I want to bring it back to what it was when it was originally built. And so we immediately got Pam and Tim on board, and away we went. So, with respect to that, we'd sort of like to walk you through very quickly what we're proposing to do to the house, and then if you have some further questions, we'll be happy to answer them. Starting out primarily with the treatment plan. And I don't know if you want to be looking at the sheets that correspond, if you just want to hear and then look later, whichever way you would like to do it. Starting with the foundation. With respect to the foundation, we intend to remove all of the sandstone so that we can reinforce and seismically retrofit the home. The removed sandstone will be then cut and faced back where it would have been originally to hide the concrete, so it will appear as if it's a sandstone foundation. I can show you, and I think that perhaps Dan brought along with him, we're going to great lengths to restore the windows and doors. And as a result, of course, we have documented, and Dan, do you have there's the sandstone that will be put back where it was originally, although it will be cut. So all the doors and windows, where we can, we will also be saving the original glass, so where we've identified the glass as original. But this is the work that will be going on the doors and windows to restore them back to their original look, and care will be taken to maintain them as a result. Here's one of them right here. Under Tim and Pam's direction, Dan has very carefully taken this house apart so that we could discover what was original and what was added. The plaster, for instance, there are several places on the house, and in fact there's nary a place where you can find the original plaster. We had to dig through plaster, and we have it. Bermina, you were asking. There it is. And then also some stripped down to some of the original color that was on the eaves and other parts of the house. So just to give you an idea of the depth of actually taking the house apart to discover all the truths about it, because it was and has been altered much more than we initially thought. And then the second level of work that we will be doing is the roof. And bringing the chimneys back to the way that they were, the espadana to be returned to the way it was. We finally found a photograph for the rear one so that we could replicate it as nearly as we could. And the downspouts, which we also believe are original, will be retained and used on the home. So as we work along through the elevations, on the west elevation for Garden Street, of course, you know we want to restore the front facade of the house. There are currently 2 windows that are on the upper level that, in fact, Commissioner Curtis, is it? I'm sorry, I don't know you. Your question about the south elevation. In fact, we're restoring that a little bit closer to its original by returning these 2 windows to where they originally were located on the home on the upper level. And that's one of the changes we'll be doing here.
It's the same drawings. There's just tabs that correlate to part of this presentation.
As a result of the work that we need to do here and to hold this up so that it doesn't fall down again and the chimney doesn't fall down again, Pam and Tim called in an outside consultant who specifies in restoration and rehabilitation engineering, and we've come up with a plan to where we only have to implicate 2 out of the total of 8 columns that we have to support the upper level of the house and the roof in what we're doing, and he's come up with a treatment plan for us to follow with respect to that. The front porch will simply be replicated in kind the way it is right now. The front door will be returned to its original as close as we can get it. That's the work on that elevation. On the north elevation,
So I'm going
to turn to it.
I'm going to skip about 20 pages of this
Your
set.
historic setting.
And that first block of information was the historic reference, the as-built conditions that were measured and documented on the structure.
So on the bottom of this page, then, is the existing north elevation. Oh, sorry, A1.6.
A16, yes.
This is our north elevation, which faces East Padre Street. This is one of the elevations where there had been some additions to the home done over the years. On this particular elevation, we will be putting in a new set of French doors, although we believe that ours will be more closely to the more historic design of the doors and windows of the home than what you see that we're taking out. The small window that you see right there by the downspout will be removed, and the window next to it relocated just a little bit over in order for it to be in the spot where it will not preclude some uses in the kitchen. And that's all that's happening on that facade other than the restoration of the remaining windows where they are. On the next page, in the rear or east elevation, facing the home behind on East Padre Street, which, by the way, was an original part of this property. The one change we will be making is on the living room wall, we are replacing that window with French doors that will go out into the garden. However, they will be the same size as the opening. That window will be carefully removed and restored and then placed either in the attic of the house or someplace within the property as specified by the historians. Should someone want to replace it and put it back in the future, it will be possible to do that. And then we're also, it's not the right one, but at any rate. And then again, the doors and windows will be restored. The stair that was added at a certain time will be removed, and I believe we are removing this wall, which was also added at a later date. It's not part of the original house.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed an original. This window right here, what is that?
Oh, it's, Alex, it's, believe me, Tony and I and everybody else, we went round and round and round about, boy, I bet you that window got added, and no, and then it's right there. And it's really quirky because once we discovered where the interior servant stair, we assumed it was the window for the servant stair, but in fact, it's not. I think it's simply a ventilation window, and since we struggled with what was it for, I have seen images of other homes, not necessarily of this design, but of this era, that have windows like that in a room and oftentimes in a bedroom where it's purely for ventilation. And we've kept it because it's there. It's never been removed, and so we're just leaving it the way it is. This is where we will be relocating the windows from the front of the house to their original position. And that's on your south elevation. We are adding a dormer on the, to the proposed, just so that that's not showing up on this drawing. We need to see that. That was the one other thing that we are doing.
This is A26, proposed elevations.
It will match the other dormers on the home. So this is what we hope and intend for it to look like when we're finished. That we literally went back in time to 1894. No new added square footage to the home. We have, and Dan can show you, carefully documented the interior materials as well. Bernard, will you hand me the two? Between Dan and our office, we've done 2 treatment plans of our own for the house. One is the interior historic documentation, where we have measurings of anything in the house that Tim and Pam told us was original, that where we might need to, in some areas where it's been removed, create new. We can match the original. And with respect to the exterior of the house, the same type of treatment where we have photographed the condition, measured it, drawn it, and then put it in a more construction type document for the contractor to follow, so that we stay in keeping and have the documentation necessary to be true to that treatment plan. Well, you know, you talk to our client. She's the one who definitely, this is her dream and her desire to really put this house back to what it was. Yeah, so here's our discovery boards, if you will. And this is our sleuth standing behind me, Dan Fromanik from Giffen and Crane. Yeah. Yeah. So it's been a fun excavation, if you will. We do have a couple of existing chimneys that look like they're about ready to tumble right down on Dan's head, but other than that, we are in pretty good shape with all of our information. The last part of this is the landscape plan, and I'll let Chris talk with you about it. Oh, the roof, I'm sorry. This was the material. When we first started looking at the photographs at the Historical Museum, they actually didn't look like clay tile. It looked like what you're seeing right here, a course of clay tile and a metal roof, much as like the train station. And we assumed that that might be very well what it was because of the train station being the metal roof. So we set out to find as many examples of what we could come as close as we could for Pam and Tim to let us know whether or not they agreed with it. We've got the windows here as well, so there's the roof. Do not need one for that. Here it is. And that's a picture of it up on the roof that you're seeing.
I'm also having Tom get some of this in the cap to see on the hip caps and ridge caps if that might
Okay.
tie in a little bit.
Right now we're showing you doing the regular tile, the two-piece tile on the ridge, and what Dan is saying is that he's getting the pieces of this material to see if you might like that better. Yeah, isn't it? Fortunately, when we put it up on the roof and stood across the street, it looked better than it did close up.
It's metal.
It's metal. Yes.
That's iron. 26 gauge.
It's metal. Yeah, it's got a coating on the top of it, Louise. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris to talk with you about the landscape plan.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, before we go to the landscape, can we ask questions about the architecture? Or
I think that would be fine if you prefer.
Well, my only slight concern is I'm looking at this photo and then your elevation, and it just seems like this is lower. I mean, look, I look at this, it's a more pointy, but this is just, I don't know. I mean, if you put them side by side.
Well, it's a photograph and a drawing for Mina, first
I
of all,
know,
which
so-
is a little problematic.
Yeah,
We
it's
have
just
no
like-
way of documenting what it was, and if it needs to be a little higher, believe me, we'll make it a little higher.
It's just that I don't see this kind of coping. I mean, I just don't see
Maybe
it.
I've got a better picture for
But
you
maybe
than what
if
you've got in
maybe
there.
you do.
Because that's what we went by, and what Pam and
I
Tim
mean, I
went
just
by.
don't
Here
see
you go.
that. Yeah.
Right here.
Oh, there it is. I see. Oh, okay. Oh, I see it now on that photo.
If you
I
look
do.
at this rear elevation, you'll see that there's a greater distance change between the base and the top than you have
Yeah,
on here.
that's my big concern.
Well, we can definitely raise it. I mean, you know, it's a guessing game, as you can well imagine.
Yeah, sure.
Not
But I
having
think
it
that
there.
is such an important restoration.
Absolutely.
And so it's just got to be.
We went
Yes.
through a process of, with the photographs as best as possible, because there is, perspective happening here.
Right.
To flatten it, to rotate it, and to bring it in and analyze it. And it's been a back and forth process.
Sure.
But we
Chair?
can definitely take a
Yeah,
look at that.
yeah. If you can just keep doing it, I guess.
Okay.
If I look at this, this is just a lot more sort of mound rather than anyway.
Definitely.
Risky.
We can definitely take a look at that.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
on that scalloped parapet, that exceeds the city's height requirement, but we're going to call it an architectural projection in order to allow it to sort of
it's a
peak above the point.
It's a restoration.
Did you have something to add? Or
I was just going to say, it is an architectural projection, so it doesn't it doesn't have to observe the roof height maximum limit yet.
I have a question on the proposed south elevation, which if you can find it here. I'm sure there are reasons for everything, but I was kind of wondering. Is the next one, right? Yeah. Okay. I was looking at. I mean, all this fenestration is somewhat different right here, and I was wondering. I'm sure there's a reason why everything's in the right place, of course. But it does look a little bit off, like nothing's, and there's not a lot of organization on this side. And I was wondering if the randomness, or I mean, like in particular, what seems somewhat odd is the proximity between these pair elements. They are not a pair of windows. They are somewhat very close. What's the
Right.
thinking
Some
behind
of it
that?
is existing condition that we're not moving. The door is one thing that we're doing. If you want to get to the demo plan, I can show you, Alex, why. If we can you roll it back so that it's on there? Yeah. We moved the door to this position right here for a use reason, and then it's not quite exactly. It's kind of over here, and left these windows where they were, if you will. Oops.
one more. There.
And it was purely to not move them too much, but to put the door where it was in a better spot than where it is right now, in terms of the interior use of the house. It's the kitchen, and believe me, it makes the kitchen a little odd, but we left those windows so that we weren't doing too much of an alteration to it. And remember, this is not what was original.
Right.
Yeah, this area is.
This is the area that's been moved around quite a bit. So none of these windows are in the original. You can see the original has one, and then so our feeling was it's such a minor elevation. It faces another home that's completely blocked by the foliage. It's not the front facade of the house. It's not seen very much, and it was already an altered facade of the house, that it really wasn't that detrimental.
Did you have the historic photographs?
Yes.
Regarding the entry porch and stair, looks to be from the demo plan that you're proposing to remove the stairs, and if this looks right, the deck itself.
Well,
Is that
it
right?
needs to be replaced, and it'll be replaced in kind.
Okay, and then looking at the new, I'm wondering, you must have photos that show what I see it looks like to be stone risers and treads, and the question is, was that how it was? And I just don't see that from this photo. And in fact, this retaining portion, or this elevated portion of the deck looks doesn't read as stone to me, but maybe there's another photo that I don't see.
Probably this one, which is not the original, but
Where's the original?
there it is, right there. You can probably see it
One thing that's
from that.
different about this original photograph is that the footprint of the porch is actually
Was
much further
farther
out
out.
and into the setback
I see.
than where it is currently today. So,
And we're not proposing to change it. We're proposing to leave it where it is.
To clarify the porch, originally, the one you see on the photograph, the oldest photograph of the street facade, it was a deeper porch, and the skirting on the porch and the steps were wood. And what we see now when we see the sandstone is the footing for probably inside of the original porch where the base of the columns come down, and the wood columns sit on sandstone plinths, which then sit on this long, not a retaining wall, but a stone wall. So that's why when you look at it now, you see stone, but you don't see stone in the oldest photograph.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any further questions from the commission? I'd like to now hear landscape then.
I have 3 copies of this. It's not in there.
I'm going to cover you. Okay.
let's put this back.
Then a color copy down there. There's just 3. 3 colored ones, Is that enough? I have some black and white ones, too. Hello.
Hi, Chris.
Our landscape concept here is to create a water-wise garden, not quite like the original photo, but we will be removing all the turf areas. And we are also using very clean and simple lines and forms because we don't want to compete with the beauty of the structure. And our plant palette, color palette really lies within the various greens, grays, and accent flowering plants and shrubs with just white. And basically what we're doing, there's the existing Eugenia hedge around the property that we'll be maintaining, the existing king palms in the front there, and the existing magnolia
Perhaps you'd
tree.
like to move here so you can be pointing for the camera.
Sorry. This is the existing Eugenia hedge that goes around the property. These are the existing king palms that flank the entry there, an existing magnolia to remain, and existing camphor trees that are there to remain as well. What we will be doing is right now this is all existing turf through this area, and this whole area in this courtyard is currently turf. So we'll be removing all of that. We will replace the feel of the turf in the front with probably a native grass, carrot panza or something like that, lower in water use. Melanie loves iceberg roses. We'll be using the white iceberg roses as accents. We will be reusing the sandstone that they are taking off of the site or the building where we can in the front entry, steps, steppers through the side yard garden areas, and so forth. We're coming through here, and this is just a very quiet garden area, maybe a fragrance-type garden. Coming back into this more of a formal courtyard, we have a series of stone paving patterns and paths surrounding a central fountain element. Then we have decomposed granite or gravel paths for circulation, creating focal points with bird baths or sundials in the garden. We will have, this will be a little more formal, that we'll use the boxwood. We'll have some vertical elements, whether it's Italian cypress or pots with topiary, just really making this a very formal space and outlining this area with iceberg roses. We will be also, there's an existing stone wall, Santa Barbara sandstone wall here that we will be rebuilding. Actually, it's only 18 inches tall to become a seat wall, so to speak, and kick this up a little bit to create a little niche here, circulation around here. These are existing olives that will remain, and we'll come into this area with maybe an evergreen hedge in the back, so to create a backdrop. We'll have rosemary, dwarf citrus, thyme, diamondia, that type of vocabulary in this area here. This is the dining terrace. We will do some sort of arbor, the arbor design I'll design that. We'll have some vines growing on that. Just have some planting against the structures here to soften that. And this will be the sandstone paving as well through this area here. This is more of a utility area, so that will just have some perimeter plantings, the paving material sandstone here, and then we'll have the steppers go through the garden area there. In the driveway, we'll be removing the existing paving and using the sandstone or Cherokee Creek pavers, I think, permeable paving surface is what we'd like to do there, and have a new trash enclosure here, which there's an existing hedge on this street side, Padre. Here we'll probably have a stucco wall with some stone columns. We may have this may be a stone wall and planting to screen that trash from the garden area. And we will, lastly, this is more of the shade garden that's on the east side. That'll probably be our only high water use area as far as plant material goes. That will be calla lilies, camellias, things like that. And that's less than the 20% high water use for the lot in the landscape area. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions from the Commission?
Yeah, I do have a question. Let's see. The stone that you want to use for paving various areas, will there be enough that you're getting from the house or off the house? Will you be, finding some? It looks like a lot of paving. I'm just.
Probably not. We'll probably have to supplement that.
Right.
This will probably be the Cherokee Creek cobble pavers. That's probably what that will be.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
we'll prioritize the areas and use the stone from the house, like
Got
on
it.
the entry, the steps, key areas like that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If you are done with your presentation, I will ask for public comment. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll go to if there are any further questions from the Commission. Then we'll go right to comments.
Madam Chair, could I just say one thing that I wish I had said, Dawn, when you and Fermina were talking about the front facade. We have done extensive studies on that front facade. We'll look at it again, definitely, but they were very detailed studies based on all the information that we've been able to glean on the house to come up with the exact shape of that facade, but we'll definitely take a look at it and make sure we're as accurate as we can be. We're hoping that today you will not only give us conceptual but preliminary approval with us to come back with the necessary things you need, colors, lighting. We do have things planned that we would want to show you. We just didn't plan to show it today. But we do have all of that, and I can show it to you if you'd like, or bring it back with the next meeting.
Can I just ask staff, it says comments only, project requires environmental assessment?
That's correct. When the agenda was prepared, Madam Chair, the Historic Structures Report had not yet been accepted. And as you know, it was accepted before this review of this project, so you can take an action.
Thank you. Comments, then?
Madam Chair? My comments are completely favorable. I'd like to commend everybody who's involved in this project, from the historians to the architects to the landscape architect. It's a lovely house, and the fact that it's going to be refurbished in my old neighborhood is really a treat. I love that part of Garden. I'm quite bowled over. I love these artifacts also. I mean, this is a very thorough report, and really gives us a flavor of what it was, and I commend it highly. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a few comments on the landscape. I like the general approach. I'm not seeing a preliminary plant list, but just a few species that I heard is definitely on the right track. And let me just make a couple of comments. Is that I'm glad you're saving the existing olives. I think you should, as you develop this, you should interweave the olives a little bit more than just in that one area by the driveway, or at least explore that idea. The other idea is you want to, I think you want to explore, you obviously have one small fountain, but you should explore the idea of water in maybe a couple other spots, whether it's a wall fountain as a focal point. I think that it could lend a nice sound to the garden. I like the formal layout. Wherever you're using stone from the house, I would just, say, obviously you said you'd prioritize, but, the things should match. I appreciate the Cherokee sandstone driveway. That'll be a nice, actually permeable example to some expense, which is a credit to the client and the landscape architect to use that. I think that'll work very nicely. It's very Santa Barbara. And I just look forward to seeing your preliminary plant list or your plant list develop, because I think the substituting the lawn is a great idea. Chris is one of the few landscape architects that's just offered the lawn substitute up front. I think that's a good approach. We're going to have less and less water, and definitely the Carex family is a good candidate for lawn substitutes. And appreciate the leaving the existing hedge and the carob tree, and I think it'll be a nice design. So I look forward to seeing the development of this concept.
Thank you. Any additional comments?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I would just I think it was very nice to thank everyone, but I would also like to add thank you so much to the owner of this property. Yes. I think we all feel that very strongly and really, really appreciate what you're doing for the community, as well as for yourself.
I have a couple of comments. I think this is a beautiful project. As far as the landscape, we still need to see the trellis, the trash enclosure.
This is some kind of a garden wall. And I was just looking at this the first time I looked at it, and I wonder if there's a way to further screen from the street, from the pedestrian side, the view of cars that inevitably are going to land outside the garage in that very nice inviting area that you have there. And if you're walking by in the morning, like I do in front of this house actually, you will see that. And this is such an important house. I'm not sure if you thought of gates. Like some people do that. They put some like a wood gate or something like big, somewhere in there. If you went through this, okay, all right. So I can see that you've been through that. Okay, well, maybe this is the lesson of the two evils. I don't know, but I kind of, it would be nice to just get the cars out of the way. And also, well, and I love everything you do, except that the roof, I'm having trouble with that, I must confess. I know the roofing you show. I don't think it's exactly the same as the Orenia adobe. It's a little bit different, but still not very convincing. And I believe that perhaps the one that on the Granada Theater is better. I think
we'd be happy to explore that. We were simply going by what Pam and Tim had told us would be in keeping with the house and the era, and trying to find things that came as close to that as we could in order for them to be able to make their findings. Because we do, we can't put tile on it and
I understand.
All of that.
I'm
Okay.
saying that
We're happy to explore something if you want to give us the...
It's like a nickel short of the dollar.
Right.
It's not it. But I think it's ready for preliminary.
I agree with Commissioner Bishop totally on the roof.
If I can summarize the comments then and ask if I could entertain, it sounds like thank you very much to the owner. We're just thrilled that you decided to move here and bring your largesse to our community, and to the team, which clearly has done an enormous amount of work in discovering the truth of this building. There are some concerns. One you've addressed in terms of the Espadanya, and I know you will continue to look at that. And there are some concerns about the roof. So these are two items which we hope you will look further on. There is some concern about giving a preliminary for the landscape. As I understand it, the trellis, the trash enclosure, the garden wall, and not enough items for a preliminary plant list. So I would consider, if we could, a split motion, or can't do it. Can't do two different levels. No, that we can do preliminary. So this is a. I will ask for the level of concern about preliminary level of approval for the landscape.
Madam Chair, I would like to comment just on that note. I think we need to take the totality of the report and the drawings that have been submitted as the totality of the preliminary approval. Just simply, Appendix D almost dictates that, the treatment plan. So given that there is that treatment plan and the landscape is addressed in the report as well, I'm not as concerned. I think Commissioner Adams, maybe you can elaborate, but it sounds like the general idea of the plant list can be addressed in a final and just verified that the intent was met. I mean, I'd like to see it get preliminary approval is where I'm going with this, and I think that the substance of the totality of the submittal warrants that.
I would really agree with that because I think we're all very sensitive about the historical part, and the roof and the esplanade are the most important thing, and we definitely would want to see that.
I will entertain a motion then for preliminary approval with those comments.
I would suggest a preliminary approval with the following items to come back, and that is the trash enclosure screening, the arbor in the back, and the roof materials as they develop.
And is it Espadanya or Espadanya? That's what I thought. And the Espadanya, I assume.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? That motion carries.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right on. Yep. Unbelievable, because when they unrolled it, I thought.
You just need the one color area.
Because at 3:15 is going to be.
You betcha. The next item is 1535 Santa Barbara Street. Yes. Good Lord.
You're going to keep that for us? I guess so.
1535 Santa Barbara Street, please.
Getting there. Hey.
And you take this.
Yes, it's amazing.
No, all we have is one, and that's all we need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you will, introduce yourselves for the record.
Sydney Baumgartner, landscape architect for the project. Paul?
Paul Larson, worked for Sydney on the project.
Alexandra Cole, architectural historian.
Thank you. You are here for a continued concept review.
Yes, and I don't believe you've seen the two fountains. Is that correct?
Well, I'm going to read the motion that was last done in July of 2008. Continued indefinitely to the staff hearing officer with positive comments. The requested modification is viewed as a community benefit as it enhances the public right-of-way, provides a serendipitous moment, and is an integral part of the wall structure. The majority of the commission would like to see more sympathy with the building, with a more moderated design in terms of color, with simplicity and sophistication. Provide some integration of the bench and the landscaped areas. Create a landscape that is not led by what was there previously. Find a resolution with a better landscape idea that includes the hardscape areas in the overall landscape plan. A permeable material should be used if possible, and the signature should be softly integrated into the sandstone.
Okay. I believe you had had seen the one bench before, and I'll give you a little background on this. The Zimmers have a garden that was designed by Elizabeth DeForest, and it was built for a woman named Dorothy Croft Atkins. And I always get that wrong. Crofton Atkins. It's hard to say all in one piece. Anyway, their sensitivities in this area really have brought, in part brought this about, because they were very sympathetic with the church. They also were very interested in Alicecat Park Memorial Gardens across the street, which Elizabeth was the spearhead in. And so as this went along, for the memorial for Mrs. Sorry, I get a little rattled. Anyway, Jules felt that he would also like a little piece of this so that he could have a memorial for himself. And there is already, again, this same curve in the wall. This is for Lori, and this is for Jules. And so what we thought we would do is try to make this as much a part of the original architecture. We've brought you, and I believe, have you seen these tiles before?
Some of us have not seen this. There are some members on this.
These are replicas from NOLA at NS Ceramic. These are the tiles that are in that central fountain here. And so these are the colors. Let's see, how are they arranged? Above and below. Is that right, Paul? And as you can see, let's see, where did these go? The kicker. Okay, that's down below. These are about as subtle as I can imagine. There's the three names. Lori, what's her middle name?
It's on the...
I'm sorry. Lori Pierre Zimmer. And that's as obvious as they get. It's no more prominent than that. We have still proposed the brick, which is an existing element in that area. And Paul went on the internet just to give you verification. There's information on that permeable concrete. It gives you the inches per hour of rainfall that it will absorb. And we just wanted to make sure that you were clear that it really would drain. It's not something that's going to run off into somewhere else. And the problem with the present brick is that being on sand, it's so uneven that it will trip. It'll trip me for sure, and lots more people that are not able to deal with uneven paving. Our planting has been coordinated with Rob Fowler, who's doing the other parts of this, and is meant to be quite simple. What were the other issues that were? I want to be sure I.
Let me ask a question while we're on that subject. And that is, okay, you're using permeable concrete. Will that be brick colored or?
No. That's the sub-base for the brick.
Sub-base for the brick.
For actual brick,
I got
just
you.
to match the
Like
exact same thing. Yeah, because brick on sand, of course, is going to wobble, no matter what we do.
Okay, thank
so,
you.
yes, you're welcome.
There was some question last time of linking the brick.
Yes, the
And
motion,
so that's
again,
been filled in
integral
there.
part of the wall structure, and majority of the commissioners would like to see more sympathy with the building, with a more moderated design in terms of color. So if these are the same tiles that were brought before and there has been no change, I'm not sure that item has been fulfilled. and provide some integration of the bench and the landscape areas, unless this drawing has changed. I don't think that has been fulfilled.
But who has seen this project?
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, we have seen it. Okay.
Yes. So
we have matched the existing tiles exactly as possible to the existing fountain in the courtyard, and so how that could be incompatible with the building design, I'm surprised. Let's go back to the drawings of the bench. This is the plaster that exists. This tile is down low. This is the bench, and this is again plaster with a kicker to prevent scuffing on that plaster at the base. I can't imagine anything closer in design to, that was our full intent, was to make it compatible with the building. Mr. Zimmer said, I don't want something really showy, I want something that will fit in with the architecture. And so that was our intent, to not be noisy about it in any way. And how we could make the names more subtle than this, I can't imagine. It's on the 3 center tiles.
There's a picture here that was a mock-up with 4 what Jules looks like quadruplets there, which show those blue lines show where the tile would go.
The kicker of the bench.
In relationship to the rest of the building.
okay, if you're done with your presentation, I will ask for public comment, and I believe Mr. DeForest wishes to speak.
Good afternoon, Kellum DeForest. I just want to compliment the designers for these beautiful benches, which I think are very, this term was used earlier, Santa Barbara. They fit right in and certainly fit into the tiling that was used at the Unitarian Church. So I think this should be allowed to go ahead. I just have been wondering, what were these, what would you call it, bump ins, these areas originally designed for, or why they were put in? Why weren't they rectangular walls if they weren't going to be used for something like these benches? Thank you.
I'm going to close public comment unless there's anyone else, and I'm going to go to questions from the commission, please.
Okay. The other question I have, the bricks, there will be joint to joint, or will there be, mortar? Just
It's a
no joint.
of what's there. Basically, there is brickwork there. and we're
Butt
just
joint.
gonna- I think it's
It's a butt joint.
running block.
Gotcha.
That's what's there.
Okay. So really no joint.
Yeah, exactly. Because that one is degrading and there's some dips and I just think for liability alone, I think it's a good idea to just stabilize it so that it doesn't provide an uneven surface.
And there are also weeds coming up through it, Bermuda and that sort of thing.
I have a question.
Yes.
What is the, refresh my memory about the zone modification?
Is that because it's a bench, it's not a garden wall, and therefore anything? What is the requirement?
Setback, I think.
The zoning modification is for I believe it's on the agenda, it's for the bench to encroach into the
Front
setback.
yard setback.
It's on a corner. Actually, both benches will be encroaching, but it's the same mod.
Okay.
I have comments.
Okay, are there any other questions? And I'll just, so you know, though this is not binding, of course, that when we took straw votes, and one of the questions was how many commissioners would prefer no tile whatsoever on the bench? 4 to 4. How many commissioners would prefer some tile? 4 to 4. And then we have the comments.
Who was missing?
Yeah, I was with the board that liked the project. I thought that at that time that the commission was too strict. I still like the project. I think it provides some serendipity and an ability for, does give something to the community, a place to sit down and slow down and enjoy the park and so forth. I don't have any problem with this. And I like the fact that the name on the tiles is clarified. Gee, anybody with a spray cans aerosol can make a name a heck of a lot bigger than that, and this is just a tiny little thing. I really don't see what the problem is. Thank you.
Okay, any, yes?
I would second Commissioner Cujo's sentiments. I think it's a very Santa Barbara project, and I love the idea of this little splash of color on the corner of Arriaga and Santa Barbara Street, and then further down the Schulzimmer Memorial, which I assume is going to be much the same in terms of tile.
Yeah,
I think
it's elevation there. It's just, it does not have the name on the tile, but it's basically the same.
I think it's a lovely project. I would commend it. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Schellenberger was right in there.
Just echoing it, the design is fine. I think it's all more than within the guidelines. I mean, that's got to be the first consideration. And just on the zoning modification, I'm totally in support of that. I mean, in my mind, I could adjust my mind where it's just an L-shaped wall. The fact that it's a bench doesn't bear on me in any way. I think we should approve that.
Thank you. Madam Boucher.
I just have one concern about the tile. It's something that I've noticed in the downtown, is that skateboarders just wreck tile benches and so forth. There are several benches
The
on
bench will be
Anacapa.
stone.
If you're going to reply, you might want to speak
yeah.
into the microphone.
Yeah,
like
this is Paul Larson.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bench will be stone.
The bench will be stone. I'm aware of that, but
Yeah.
the use of tile on these benches, if nobody wrecks it, that's grand, but I'm just bringing up the fact that also then probably we'll wind up with those little metal knobs to keep the skateboarders off this, which is another problem. I'm not going against the project. I'm just saying these are concerns I have.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Curtis.
I think I was one of the four who thought before that the color should be a little bit more restrained because of the very narrow color palette of the church when seen from outside. Admittedly, the fountain, but you have to go inside the courtyard. But I think I've been persuaded that this will work. I think it is not a large area, so it will be a very small accent point. I still like the idea of the restrained colors, and I think one of the reasons that I had concerns was about the tile, the same thing that was mentioned by Ms. Boucher about whether or not it might be damaged and be a maintenance issue in the future. But I support the project the way it is now, and I also have no problem with the recommending approval of the modification that is requested.
Okay. Any further comments? I'll look for a motion.
I move that we approve the project as submitted and
Excuse
the
me.
modification.
It's comments to the modification hearing officer, then they will come back for final approval. So
positive comments
It's
all the way
positive
around.
comments and forwarded indefinite continuance to staff hearing officer with positive comments.
Oh.
Does the board support the mod?
Yes.
Yes. That's where it's going now.
Yes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? That motion is carried.
Thank you all very much.
Madam
Thank
Chair,
you.
I have a question for you. Does that mean this comes back again, or it's done?
It goes to the modification officer. Once you get your modification,
Then you come back.
here for preliminary and final.
You see us again and again.
Get to see it.
Would you like this to go with that?
Sure. It's a good
Yes?
it's a good
You know
idea.
what, Madam Chair? Would that come back then to full board or to consent?
Can we change the motion to consent?
Consent.
To consent?
Consent?
Okay.
Consent? Consent calendar?
For final?
Yeah.
Aha. Yes, it will come back for consent. I don't see all of it.
Consent.
So they'll notify us.
Thank you.
And do you have enough seats?
We only need one.
That's true.
It's yours.
Lord willing.
Okay.
We got one extra here.
The next item
One for our record.
was in that pile of stuff.
Is a discussion item regarding the Alternative Building Heights Charter Amendment. Yes. Let's see how long it takes now.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
the lead staff planner who will lead this discussion is Beatrice, and I will be assisting in this presentation. So we'll begin with B.
Oh, thank you.
Can I have a little mic? Okay.
Should we take public comment? Go ahead.
Are we ready?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Historic Landmarks Commission. We are here to meet with you and discuss this Alternative Building Heights Charter Amendment that is currently undergoing review by the Ordinance Committee and City Council. As all of you know, the Save El Pueblo Viejo group has qualified a charter amendment to be on the ballot in November of 2009. Once that qualified, we started working with the Ordinance Committee and the Council on a possible alternative amendment that could be on the ballot and be different than the one proposed by Save El Pueblo Viejo group. We have been working with the Ordinance Committee. We've met with the Joint Planning Commission, City Council, and the Ordinance Committee gave us some direction to meet with the design review boards and the Planning Commission and get some specific feedback on some of the components. Originally, when we started meeting with the Ordinance Committee, there was a thought that we would do an interim ordinance as Plan Santa Barbara progressed that would focus on some design issues, specifically open space, setbacks, maximum floor area ratios, height, and unit sizes. However, it was determined by the Ordinance Committee and the Council that it was preferable to do a more focused charter amendment and not do an interim ordinance at this time. They initiated a charter amendment, wanted us to keep the amendment focused, the language simple, and focus it to height, a variable front yard setback, and some additional open space for certain projects, and I'll go over that all in a minute. And I believe you all did receive our staff report that we sent ahead of time. They also made in their motion that the unit size and any floor area ratio considerations should be discussed in the broader Plan Santa Barbara process and not a part of this charter amendment at this time. So what we're discussing with you is specifically new building height standards and considering reducing where 60 feet is allowed to 45 feet with some limited exceptions. Those exceptions being any projects that meet a community priority land use. In your staff report was attached like the list that have been approved in the past by council, as well as projects that have a certain affordable housing component and a certain rental housing component. Also looking at a variable front yard setback for the C2 and CM zones, and again, later in this presentation I'll go into more detail, and some greater open space standards for those buildings that would be found to be the exceptions to the 45-foot height if it passed. The implementing ordinance that is going to go along with this charter amendment would address all the specifics and would be the zoning code that would implement it all. We expect that it would be adopted before the November vote in 2009, and that if the charter amendment were to pass, then the ordinance would become effective. The charter section that we're talking about is Charter Section 1506, which is our Building Heights Charter section. Currently, in the municipal code, that is implemented by the C2, CM, M1, and OM1 being your general commercial and your industrial zones have a 60-foot height limit. And also right now in our code it says that any buildings immediately adjacent to any residential zone property also is more restrictive. I believe you got copies of this map also. It's all the area in red is your C2, CM, M1, and OM1. You do have C2 in the upper State Street area, but because of the SD2 overlay, it is limited to 45 feet. So the area on this map in red would be the areas that are proposed to be reduced in height to 45 feet with some exceptions. Just to quickly go over the comparison, the Save El Pueblo Viejo Charter Amendment would reduce the 60-foot height to 45 feet in all those areas except in El Pueblo Viejo. The alternative charter amendment the council has initiated would reduce the 60-foot height to 45 feet, but allowing some additional height for those buildings that meet the community priority designation, have affordable housing or rental units. The community priority land use, it's basically those projects found by the city council as necessary to meet a present or projected need directly related to public health, safety, or general welfare. Projects such as museums, childcare facilities, or community centers. Again, you got the list of projects that have qualified in the past. This finding is made by council. It goes for a preliminary designation and then back for a final designation. Another exception being considered is those projects that possibly have a higher inclusionary requirement. Currently, the inclusionary requirement for projects of 10 or more is you have to provide 15% to middle income. One thought is that projects that provide 30% of the units to middle income could qualify to exceed this 45-foot height. Again, council will ultimately decide on what percentage would qualify the projects as exemptions before we finalize any ordinance. It would be expected that these projects would also need to go now to City Council for a preliminary and final designation on being an exception to the 45 feet. Another exception being considered is projects that have rental. Discussed so far is clearly if it's a 100% rental project, then it would be considered to meet this exception of over 45 feet. And there also has been discussion that in mixed use where you have commercial either on the first or second floors, a determination needs to be made like what percentage of that total building should need to be rental to meet this exception. These types of projects would be recommended to also go to City Council so that any project that is going to go over the 45 feet would need to go to Council to get their designation. We will be requesting more focused input from the Planning Commission on this percentage of the project that should be rental. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jaime Limon to help with the explanation of the heights.
Good afternoon. What I would like to do at this point is try to break down buildings sections to try to understand in greater detail why staff is recommending an alternative to the 40-foot height limit. As we can see from this diagrammic building height study that was prepared as part of the El Pueblo Viejo, Save El Pueblo Viejo group, there is an ability for a design that affords a 4-story structure. And this is a specific example where you could stack residential units above some type of commercial or garage uses and still achieve a 40-foot height limit. What we'd like to do is offer you that this type of example is very limiting, and it does not provide a lot of flexibility with respect to plate heights and living area heights. And what we're seeing in our construction recently is the desire to have a higher plate height or a higher floor-to-floor ceiling heights. And this is what we are going to attempt to show, that the realities of these assemblies that are between floors requires that the structure be taller as a result, and the reality of what you've approved in buildings, and I'll give you a couple examples, has translated to taller stories from floor to floor. And that's what I'd like to show you some examples of. And arguably, there's different components of a building that can be constructed, but we'd like to share that type of construction detail in further elaboration to assist you in your discussions. So the next slide, please. This is another component of a slide that shows that the 4-story building is the type of building that typically approaches the 60-foot height limit, or near that limit, and that the 45-foot height limit can be achieved with a 4-story in a commercial zone. So the middle example is sort of the outside EPV example, if you could think of it that could be achieved, a 4-story building. And we agree. It's easier to meet to build a 4-story within the 45 feet. And what the reality we feel is, in the Save El Pueblo Viejo group is really saying that a 40-foot structure is what will prevail in order to limit heights in that area. Next slide. What we took is we asked a local architect to assist us in showing examples that would show the reality of what these building heights would translate to if we had some factors built into the floor ceiling assemblies. And I'll get into those assemblies a little bit more. But what you're seeing here is an example of a mixed-use building that has 3 floors of residential over a ground floor commercial. And when you look at the floor plate heights, this is what we've approved on buildings. In reality, I've looked at several examples, and they range anywhere from 11 to 13 feet plate to floor. And we're dealing with accessibility often on the commercial ground floor for parking garage structures, as well as a desire for commercial floor spaces to be of a higher volume. And that translates into a larger height. Now, obviously, we've had examples where they've been excessive, and that's something that we've got to focus in on, how that bottom floor will increase the overall height of the building. But in this case, we see that the building approaches more of a 46-foot height structure for a 4-story structure. Next slide. This is another example showing 1 floor of commercial with 3 floors of residential. And it also shows you that, again, if you want to incorporate some type of roofed elements in a flat roof, you could still have problems meeting the 40-foot height limit if you were to propose a 4-story building. Next slide. This is a little shorter building, typical mixed use, but we've also shown an example where the practical realities of a site have to be factored in how we calculate height. We will be dealing with floors that are, or slope properties that have slope, and that will factor into the overall height of how we measure a building to the lowest point of adjacent grade, natural adjacent finished grade. And you also have conditions where they're in a flood zone, and we'll have to elevate the building. That further compounds the need to increase the assemblies that are required in order to have level floor and ceiling systems. And so this is another example where we've determined that 40-foot will be difficult to meet. This is an example of a floor section. Now, we looked at several buildings to see the components that were approved. And the range is anywhere from 18 inches to 3 or 4 feet, depending on the systems that are proposed. And this, if I can just break this building down a little bit more, shows a structural I-beam that's proposed to help support the structure that also has to be addressed into the overall depth of this floor-to-ceiling assembly. We often have ductwork that is incorporated into the building that needs to be routed around these structural members. We have chases and ductwork that also are put in above the ceiling. We have recessed fixtures and also fire sprinklers that need to be placed into it, including the main lines that are incorporated into this. And so what this basically says is if you incorporate these wide floor-to-ceiling assemblies, you will get increased height in buildings. And if you don't account for this, you're going to severely limit where they put their ductwork and how they incorporate their floor-to-ceiling assemblies. Okay, next. This shows an actual mixed-use condition where you have a smaller range. This is, I think, closer to 2'9", where you have concrete assemblies that could, again, lower that 13 feet down to about 11.7 between floors. So it's another example where, it's not just trying to get it down to 10 feet where it might not be practical. Next section. This is another example where it's about 3 feet when you look at the different type of assemblies. Now, again, I've seen them 30 inches. The building that was approved by Jeff Shelton on the 500 block of Chapala that this commission has struggled with on height, that had 30-inch assemblies. And you did all you could to lower the height of that building. So I just want to point that out. And I've seen them, and again, any range from 18 to 30 inches. And the bigger buildings obviously have more structural concerns. Next. This is a more simple assembly where you do have more residential stacking occurring, And you have an example here with sprinklers and without sprinklers, and the difference is about 5 inches. So that is a much tighter assemblies when you're going from residential to residential. So we do agree that there could be some savings there in these assemblies as far as space. Now I want to just show you some examples of buildings that we have just for conversation purposes. This is Chapala, 328 Chapala, 58.5 feet, just an example. That's a 3-story building, I believe. This is a 4-story building, 58 feet. The one under construction, 531, is 42 feet. Again, the range of floors is only 3 stories, is, I believe, 10, 13, and 12. So you have about, let me see if I have my notes here. Refer to them. You have about 36 foot of structure and about 4 or 5 feet of roof, getting you up to that 42-foot level. 617 Gardens across the street. Another example, 46 feet, and this happens to be a 4-story building. And this building also had assemblies that had about 10-foot plate to ceiling heights on some floor levels up to 12 feet. It came in about 45, 46 feet, and it had a sloped condition also, so they had to account for that. Another one on West De La Guerra, 3-story structure, 38 feet. So again, you're approaching the 40-foot limit with 3 stories. 622 Anacapa, 50-foot structure. And now we get to some specific questions that we'd like to go over with you with respect to height. And we have some additional questions that we will be also introducing after we present our entire presentation. I believe we don't want to necessarily answer these questions yet, but we want to have these questions put in your mind as you consider the other factors that we're going to present and have Bee walk you through as far as the variable setback and open space considerations and maybe exceptions that we want to consider. These are the questions that we would like to have you consider. Does a 40-foot height limit result in a reduction from 4 to 3 stories? If so, we'd like to have the charter amendment discussion actually, entertain those type of discussions. And if so, can a 3-story building of 40-foot accommodate a sloped roof for commercial mixed use? That's a concern. That are we going to inadvertently encourage a lot of flat roofs within that 40-foot limit? And would 45 feet allow 4 stories with sloped roofs? We believe that it is more feasible with 45 feet versus 40. And again, when you're dealing with the 45-foot height limit, should we even approach 60 feet? Some type of consider de facto exception and max. ABR was asked that similar question, and they felt that they didn't even want to talk about it de facto. If you go over 45 feet, it's whatever the board feels is appropriate for that building. And we'll continue the presentation.
Another issue that's part of this whole charter amendment and new ordinance would be a new front yard variable setback for commercial and mixed-use buildings. Currently in the C2, CM, M1, and OM1, there is no front yard setback. You can build right up to the property line. Unless, of course, you're a 100% residential project, then residential setbacks apply, the R3 and R4 standards. Currently, what's being proposed is a variable 5-foot front yard setback in the C2 and CM, which are the commercial zones, for commercial buildings and mixed-use buildings. At this point, it's being considered that corner lots would require both frontages to have a variable front yard setback. The ordinance committee felt that the M1 and OM1, which are your industrial zones, that a 5-foot variable may not be appropriate, but they did want to entertain that if it's a 45-foot or higher building, so your larger structures, that then one should apply. This area would be for landscaping, pedestrian amenities, and just giving variation and openness along the frontage of buildings. One recommendation is to exempt those properties that front on State Street and those that intersect State Street 1 block east and west from Montecito Street to Sola Street. And this is a map of, on the south is Montecito Street, and so it would be all the blocks that intersect State, 1 block each way, 1 block in either direction. So in that case, those properties would maintain the 0 front yard setback, as is currently. at the ABR, there was some confusion as to what a 5-foot variable front yard setback meant. And basically, it is taking the width of the lot times 5 feet, and that amount of square footage would need to be unobstructed or without building along the front. And these are just some very basic examples. This is, of course, if you just did the straight 5-foot setback. This is if half the building went up to the property line and the other portion stepped back, leaving that 250 square feet, or one with just some varying elements. Again, these are very basic, not architectural or to scale. The other consideration is we're not proposing any changes to, different from the front yard setback, is the open space standards that apply to buildings. Currently, we have open space requirements for mixed use and residential. Commercial doesn't require any open space. But one consideration is that for those buildings that meet the exception, let's say that the charter amendment passed and buildings are now limited to 45 feet, for those that council authorizes to go over 45 feet, the council is considering that those provide a substantial amount of open space in addition to the 5-foot variable setback and the findings by council that they can just go over the height limit. So we would want feedback from you today on what you consider to be a substantial amount. Is it double the open space requirement? In addition, where should it be required? Along the frontage, within the site, flexible? In discussions with ABR, they strongly felt that it should be flexible and it should be on a case by case and depending on the uses that occupy the building. Just real quickly to go over our existing standards for open space. If you are a residential or mixed use project in these commercial zones, you have to provide a small amount of private. You can provide 10% on grade common area. That 10% cannot be in any of your setbacks. So if we have a new front yard variable setback, it would be in addition to that. And also this newer standard of 15 by 15 common area. Or you can do a whole different method where you just provide 15% of your total lot area in open space. Again, commercial has none. Real quickly, the next steps that for processing this charter amendment, we hope to present a lot of this information to the Planning Commission tomorrow, get some of their feedback where we need it. We'll be going to the Joint Planning Commission and City Council work session next week. We're working on drafting the ordinance and taking some draft language to the Ordinance Committee by March 3rd. We'll be going to City Council for direction on some of the draft language and doing environmental review. Going to the Planning Commission with the ordinance and then going through the introduction and final process. Charter language being due to the city clerks by June 16th. So we're on a pretty tight timeline, and we look forward to your comments. We would recommend opening the public hearing on this, and then we have the list of the focus questions we'd like to walk you through. And real quickly, we did receive a letter from Paula Westbury, and we've received some emails from James and Mary McAuliffe, Monica DeVito, Phoebe Alex, and the Santa Barbara AIA.
Thank you, and I will open public comment, but I have a question for staff. Are you asking for comments from the commission? Are you expecting a majority statement, or are you possibly entertaining the concept that there may not be a majority and there will be separate comments?
We can provide separate comments. We just want your general input on some of these focus questions. It's not necessarily a majority or a specific action. It's just comments to the council, the ordinance committee.
Madam Chair, also, it's been past practice if you see that there's a split vote, that you can record that split vote with some type of straw vote.
Is that what you wish to have happen?
I think it's just a matter of whether there is a consensus and whether you can make, because I think it dilutes the comments if just one individual member indicates a desire. So we'd like to hopefully have the commission speak with one voice.
I will now open public comment, and the first person I have is Kathy McCammon, and after her, Jim Westby. You've got to alter yourself here.
Thank you. Okay, I'm
Kathy McCammon, and I'm here for the League of Women Voters. First of all, we have a real concern about the proposal for the alternative ordinance having exceptions for public benefit, community priority, affordable housing, etc. This basically would permit projects that are very similar to Chapala 1. And Chapala 1 was really the poster child for our alternative, or for our ordinance. A lot of the people that were supporting our initiative and a lot of the people that signed the different petitions, the one thing they said over and over again was Chapala 1 is not what we want. And under the proposed alternative here, you could do a Chapala 1 or something very similar. So we feel that this really wouldn't be acceptable to most of the community. Another thing is that we do favor setbacks and open space, but these should be subject to an ordinance. The city could do an ordinance right now that would improve setbacks and open space. And we don't think that type of detail should be in the charter. Also, we think that it's important that there be setbacks for all the structures. It shouldn't be just limited to talking about over 45 feet, but it should apply to all structures. Then, I guess the main thing is, do you really want to clutter your charter, the city's charter, with this kind of detail? Because we really need to try out how setbacks would work for different buildings. And maybe we see something that doesn't work and we want to change it. Well, you'd have to go back to a vote of the people to change setbacks. So I think it's really important that this be in ordinances which can be changed if we see that they don't work. Thank you.
Next is Jim Westby, and after him, Sue Adams, please.
Is this on here?
Yes. If it's on.
No, it is. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. My name's Jim Westby. It seems to me if we're going to put an initiative on the ballot, it needs to be better than the Citizens Initiative. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. I agree with Kathy's comments. We need to prevent large buildings like Chapala 1, which does have 30% affordable housing. And if you've ever seen this, we have a picture of this building from the air, and it just doesn't fit in with Santa Barbara. And I understand it's in financial trouble, and what's going to happen if it goes into bankruptcy, and, you know, this is just not good for our city. The other thing I'd like to talk about is most of you know that, especially this committee, that we just received recognition from the National Historic Preservation Trust, one of the few cities, in fact, I think the only city in California. Now, you think about what happened in Chapala around the Brinkerhoff property. You know, I mean, we're not going to continue to get recognized. And this is really good for our city. It brings tourists. It creates demand for our city to get this kind of recognition. But the planning that we have had on Chapala has not been good. And I would encourage you to incorporate any thoughts that you have around that in your comments. I definitely feel you ought to have maximum height, not plate height, because plate height leaves it open to steep roofs, and we could even exceed 60 feet depending on what plate height you would talk about. The other thing of concern is when you think about 60 feet, I mean, you know, that leaves open the modification for the city to do 5 stories, and that would be an absolute disaster from a density standpoint, congestion standpoint, environmental standpoint. So we definitely don't want to see anything like that. And if you looked at Jaime's charts up there, you really can get 4 stories in 45, 46 feet. So why do we need 60 feet? I would ask that question. Those of you that attended the roundtable at the Biltmore before the holidays, where the 3rd District Supervisor, Zev Yerlowski, talked about what's happening in L.A. and the effect that these huge buildings are having on their area, he encouraged us to keep construction, even affordable housing, whatever you do, to small buildings that fit in with the charm and character of Santa Barbara. don't destroy this beautiful place. Setbacks, variable setbacks, you need to give that some thought. I think variable setbacks may work, but it can't be a long, skinny piece of land that makes up the square footage. It needs to have some minimums and maximums on how you would do that. And I look at some of the charts up there, and they seem kind of goofy and wouldn't really have public benefit. Open space, I think that's really important that open space be on the ground floor. We got projects where modifications are being given, that putting it on the third, fourth floors. That's not good for community benefit, citizen benefit, to have open space on higher level floors. That's only good for the people that are living in these buildings. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if you could keep your comments to 2 minutes, that would be appreciated. Sue Adams, and then Kellum.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I have much to say that has already been said, so I won't repeat them. But our concern is that the alternative ordinance is not significantly better than the citizens' initiative, and I want to impress upon you how deeply we feel about that initiative. That first, it protects a city that is like no other. And as soon as we begin climbing taller and taller and putting our families, taking them out of the low impact, low pressure neighborhood feeling, the village feeling, the sooner we start doing that, the quicker we will be to losing a city that is like no other. So I know that you are as concerned about that as we are, but I think that the intimacy of our neighborhoods, particularly in the area that we are studying, is as important as filling in and density issues and mandates. I think that we have to hold firm on what our forefathers felt was an important issue in this community, that we remain 1 and 2 story. And as I recall, at the downtown waterfront visioning sessions that we went through, remember those many years ago, that we, I guess, threw in the trash. It's not in the trash for a lot of us. I think that we have to remember that we felt it back then when we knew we were growing. We need to keep in mind that 1 and 2 stories still works and works beautifully here. So there's so much more I wanted to say, but it's about intimacy, and the intimacy that Santa Barbara and its residents have with their landscape. We know where the ocean is. We can see it. We can see our mountains from where we live. If we begin building up higher and higher, those things no longer are in our reference points. So please keep that in mind. And lastly, I really am reluctant to see City Council turning into a planning commission. I think all planning should be here at HLC, and the planning commissions that City Council is certainly not the place for good planning. Thank you.
Thank you. Kellum, and then lastly, Mr. Cornell.
Excuse me. I've Kellum DeForest. I have points. I have yet to see any proof that buildings over 45 feet actually provide effective, affordable housing that cannot be accomplished by housing that's done under 45 feet. There is no proof. There is no proof that people want to live in such structures, and one only has to look to our own housing authority and the buildings they have built that have actually provided affordable housing in very attractive smaller buildings. The next point I want to make is El Pueblo Viejo is certainly almost built out. The new building in El Pueblo Viejo means tearing down the old buildings and building taller buildings. That is why the El Pueblo Viejo initiative wishes to keep those buildings in the El Pueblo Viejo at 40 feet. And the third point I want to make is, as has been pointed out, by allowing City Council to say on a whim of a majority vote that something has community priority means that and it's been my view that anything that somebody wants has community priority. I haven't heard anything turned down that wanted to have community priority. Excuse me. Thank you.
Thank you.